Welcome to the National Fantasy Pregame Show, brought to you by Nolan Ryan Beef Jerky, the official beef jerky of the Major League Clubhouse Managers, brought to you by MyFantasyFix.com and Fantistics. That's InsiderBaseball.com. I'm Lou Blassi along with Michael Waldo. You can also find us on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio on the Fantistics Insider Baseball Show every Saturday and Sunday morning from 10 to 1, so come join us on Sirius. One of the big stories of the preseason, Michael, has been the installation of a humidor in Chase Field, and at the time when it broke, there was a lot of discussion about it. The labor draft came, I think, the next day or the day of, and it actually had an effect on the labor draft. There was a lot of talk about it, and it's an interesting study because we got some really what we like at Fantistics and InsiderBaseball.com. We get some quantifiable data. We could really start breaking this down, and we got some percentages. And the takeaway for me, a couple great articles on it if you want to go look it up. But the takeaway for me was that the humidor had a bigger effect on Coors Field than we generally give it credit for, because it's kind of lost in the fact that Coors is still a very offensive ballpark, but we don't really have a grasp on how much it did diminish Coors. And as it goes into Chase Field, some of the data suggests, some of the thoughts suggest, the physicists suggest that there might even be a bigger effect at Chase Field. And I don't want to get too much into the park effect at Chase, because we won't know till it actually gets in play, although we think there's going to be a pretty good drop here, especially on fly balls. But let's talk about that a little before we get into some individual players and thoughts about how it may affect them.
Yeah, so if you think about it, Chase Field has the 5th largest outfield of any major league ballpark. Compare that to Coors Field, which actually has the largest outfield of any major league ballpark that you could imagine. Yet, even with the humidor, there's it's still a very offensively minded ballpark. So you think, hey, it's not making a big difference. A big reason of that is elevation too.
Yeah.
You talk about elevation in Colorado. That's 5,000 feet above sea level. Compare that to Arizona. Arizona is only 1,000 square feet above sea level. So if they're using the same settings as what they currently use in Colorado, suddenly, you're talking about a 4,000 altitude drop, which is significant for a baseball.
Right.
And you're talking about, an outfield that is already, a very deep outfield. When the balls go into this humidor, it's going to drive a very large impact. To me, I've seen numbers from 20%. I've seen numbers 30%. I've seen numbers even as big as 40%. I'm not smart enough to crunch those numbers myself. But
really, that's saying something, by the way. Yeah.
Logically, when I think about it, what it does is it creates enough uncertainty in my mind that I'm very cautious when I'm trying to draft and value these Diamondbacks players. Now, obviously, every point in the draft, there's a place where you're going to draft somebody. But I'm going into these drafts from an offensive standpoint, very, very cautious to draft anybody. I'll let somebody else take that risk, and maybe they'll get a great value from it, but they could also get a really, really bad value from it as well. If maybe the humidor is worse than what we thought. Maybe they have to adjust it mid-season, and we'll see if that's what's going to be interesting. They tried to do this last year, and Major League Baseball said, no, you can't do it. So what happens if whatever setting they put the humidor on has an extremely adverse impact to the offense of the ball? It sounds like Major League Baseball is probably going to make them leave it. So you could be stuck with a whole season in this experiment with the humidor, and who knows? It's very scary to me, Lou.
Let's start at the top, and this is not going to affect every player equally. That's one of the things we have to break down. First of all, we can't just broad brush discount all the Diamondbacks or pump up their pitchers because of this. But let's start at the top with Goldschmidt, because this had a big impact on Paul Goldschmidt, who was the top half of the first-round player before this news came out. He dropped down to second half of the first round. In some instances, some suggestions even make him a second-round player. Is that a bit of an overreaction?
For me, no. I don't want to draft him. So I don't think even if I were, on the turn in the second round and Goldschmidt was there, I'd think hard about it. But part of the reason I'm not comfortable drafting him, especially if it's a 12-team league or something like that, I see first base as a very deep position this year, and there's a lot of first base that I feel that I'm comfortable drafting. I'd rather invest my picks elsewhere at shallower positions, and just with the uncertainty with what we don't know what's going to happen in Arizona, it worries me. With that said, Goldschmidt is a legit base stealer. He can steal you upper teens of bases, and that has tremendous value. And even if Goldy, let's just say worst case scenario, Goldschmidt only hits 20 home runs, almost cuts his total in half.
Yeah.
That seems like an absolute worst case scenario, considering he's still going to play half his games on the road. But let's just say it happens. Even a 2020 player like Goldschmidt who hits close to 300, man, it's hard to argue against the fact that you could draft him in the second round and it wouldn't bury you in the standings. Maybe you're not getting full value back, but it's not going to lose you your season.
It's one of the, we've lost a floor type player at the top of the draft where you want to return value. You're not looking for profit, but you want to get what you pay for. You've got Mike Trout, you've got Jose Altuve, and then I can start, Nolan Arenado, who's a little bit less multidimensional than those players and some of the players in the top half of the first round. Every other player I can ask questions about, and now Goldschmidt becomes one of those players. He drops from a sure thing, a floor player, to a guy we can ask questions about.
Yeah, definitely. But, I think the guys who really get hurt by it, they're the Jake Lambs of the world. They're the guys who are maybe the weaker end offensive players that maybe don't have the pop that Goldschmidt has. I think they're the ones that are going to see the biggest impact when those lazy fly balls are hit. Maybe they're not hit the hardest.
Right.
Those are the ones that I think are going to get held up and turn into outfield outs. The other, on the flip side, starting pitching is interesting to look at as well. Because, guys like Robbie Ray, who's traditionally a very heavy fly ball pitcher.
Right. That's why everyone went nuts with this move. They started upgrading Robbie Ray because he's a fly ball pitcher. This is going to help him the most.
Right. Fly ball pitcher and a heavy strikeout pitcher. It's like, what's not to love about it? It's fantastic. What's interesting about it, though, is that actually Zach Greinke gave up more home runs than Robbie Ray last year. But people are talking about Zach Greinke improving, but most people are talking about Robbie Ray improving. So, I think it's something that, like offensive players with pitching, I kind of want to wait and see. I don't want to grossly overpay for the starting pitcher because what if the Humidor doesn't have an impact? It's the opposite argument where maybe it doesn't have much of an impact at all, and now suddenly I used a third-round pick on Robbie Ray. I could have used that somewhere else.
Right.
Not that I don't like Robbie Ray. It's just at his
You don't
value,
want to pay a premium for him because of the Humidor.
That's right.
Right. And splits weren't particularly odd. It was 13 homers at home and 10 homers on the road. 23 homers wasn't particularly bad for his innings count. He's not a guy who's been that susceptible to homers that this is going to upgrade him that much.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So for me, my biggest takeaway is just the fact that I think I'm cautious this year. I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody can tell you if they say they're going to tell you exactly what's going to happen. Don't believe them, because nobody's going to know until we get a pretty good sample size of games in just to see how this ballpark performs. It's going to be interesting next draft season to have the same conversation, though, because it's going to be fascinating to look at the data year over year and actually measure the true impact.
That's Michael Waldo. I'm Lou Blasser. You can find us at fantasticsinsiderbaseball.com. Go check us out. Go check us out on the Insider Baseball blog, which is free to non-subscribers. Go download the free demo of our draft advisory program. Get that set up and take a look at it. Join us on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio Saturdays and Sundays from 10 to 1. And when you're doing it, head to Kroger's or go to Amazon. Get yourself some Nolan Ryan beef jerky and sit down and enjoy it on Saturday and Sunday morning with us on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio. Go to myfantasyfix.com. If you're playing PGA DFS, check in with Skeeter Robinson here on the National Fantasy Pregame Show, as well as myfantasyfix.com. Head on over to our Facebook page, National Fantasy Pregame Show. That's where you want to go. And give us a like so you know when you drop our podcasts. Everyone have a good preseason. We'll talk to you again soon.